Do we have Councillor Nielsen with us yet? Well, we do have a quorum, so I'm going to welcome committee members, subcommittee members to this resumption of our June 7th sign bylaw subcommittee, and welcoming Councillor Allen and Councillor Nielsen and staff, Director Benner and Coordinator Van Alstyne. And we're picking up on our agenda at item 5.1. We were working our way through Schedule B, which were the proposed signs that would require a permit. And we had got as far as the digital display signs, where we stopped discussion, and the idea was to do a little homework to figure out where we were at with digital display signs. Just talking about, how challenging this process is to keep track of. I did send around just informally an organizational chart, and I'm not sure, we don't have to use it. I know I'm going to refer to it, but Councillor Allen and Councillor Nielsen, did you receive that and able to take a look at it? Okay.
I would make a motion that we include that on today's agenda to be able to reference.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Allen to include, it's called the organizational working chart, and seconded by Councillor Nielsen to add to today's agenda. All in favor? And that's carried. I was trying to, I did this purely for my own reasons, but when I was doing it, I thought it might be useful because I'm sure I'm not the only one here who's struggling a little bit just with the complexity of this and the overall, wanting to get the overall context. So I was looking at the things, the priorities that we had talked about. So whether it's on municipal property, or whether it's on or over municipal property, visible, on public property, but visible, and private property, and then the safety considerations, actual harm to somebody if the sign fails, and obviously distraction to the public, traffic distraction. Community standards is just an umbrella term to include nuisance, clutter, and also, it's not really a principle, I guess. We want to include something about appropriate language and respect for all. And then the regulations, whether they require a permit currently and where the designation is. So for me, I'm going to be switching back and forth between our Schedule B and then looking at, this organizational chart. Something else I did, I started our homework from last time for the digital display sign was to, compare with some other sign bylaws. And I got started on that, and then I just got carried away, and I did a whole chart on all the signs that we're going through, and probably 6 different municipalities. So for when we get into the digital display sign, I'll have some, different regulations from different municipalities, how they compare. There's an awful lot of consistency. There are some interesting ways that other municipalities have dealt with certain things that are, we might want to consider. And but it is hard, because it's hard to find municipalities our size, which are more rural. And once you get into the more urban areas, then it's really complicated because of all the designations. So apart from that little preamble, if we could go back then to the Schedule B. And so there's quite a lengthy definition of a digital display sign. It looks like, just going over this, I couldn't remember what we decided, but it looks like it's in all designations except neighborhood. And sorry, where am I? Yeah. And there weren't that many regulations, just the, yeah, that they should be separated by 300 meters. They're not, yeah, they're not fuel, gas pump signs have a different section. And 1 image per 60 seconds, we had talked about the maximum area not exceeding 0.5 square meters. So any comments on that before I share what I found out?
I'm interested to hear what your research found.
Okay. All right. So first of all, not every municipality calls them digital display signs. Some call them digital display signs / electronic message boards. So I think that might be something we would like to consider. I think it's maybe a little more descriptive. One restriction which might be good as far as distraction to drivers was Guelph, I believe, had 30 meter setback from residential property lines and intersections. You think electronic message board could be, well, is often part of a included like an animated sign because it is moving, it is a distraction. So I thought that 30 meter setback from an intersection and from a residential property would both address distraction to drivers and also nuisance to residents. So that was one thing. The only other variation was how long the image could stay before it changed. We had 1 minute. Some of the larger centers had every 30 seconds, every 20 seconds, every 10 seconds. I'm of the mind that change of image in 1 minute is the least distracting anyway. So yeah, and I didn't see anything about size, although I was going to suggest, we had the discussion about the sign on the school and the sign in the library as being electronic message board, and wondering if there could be an allowance for, or an exemption or a different category for institutional use. So, the school and the library are institutional. It could be like an arena or a facility like that. May have a larger than 0.5 square meter sign like they do now. Anyway, so there's some ideas. Any thoughts to any of those things? Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair Little. The 30 meter setback from rural property lines and intersections, I understand the objective there. If we're saying we're not going to have them in neighborhood settings, and we're trying to be less distracting in neighborhoods and such, I can understand that. The length of image, 60 seconds, or because I would almost agree, less than 30 seconds, you're actually being able to a chance to read what's on there anyways. So I would say 30 seconds would be minimum, but 60 seconds, I'm not going to challenge that one. I think that's fair. I think it's logical. The hard part, like I understand the reason for the institutions and saying, okay, we'll allow them there. The part that kind of twists in my brain is that, okay, we're going to give laws to everybody, but we're going to break them ourselves. And we're going to make things different for ourselves. So institutions being kind of usually more government oriented, right? And so we're creating a bylaw that says municipality can have an electronic sign that's bigger, but as a business, you're not allowed. So that part I trip over. I don't know if Councillor Allen has any other concepts. It's a trip, right? It kind of, that premise of the restrictions not making sense to me. If we're saying the institutions can do it, then why would we challenge? If we're saying it's a distraction, the size is warranted, the size is a safety issue, but we're saying, no, we can do it, just the business can't, is challenging for me.
Any comments or response to Councillor Nielsen, Councillor Allen?
Well, I agree on that point that the bylaw should be for everybody. I guess the only ones that won't be included are ones that are already up as of when this bylaw is passed. We can't go back and make them change it. So on that point, I agree 100%. We shouldn't get special treatment. We or any, the school or any institution.
Okay.
Second thought, Chair Little. Wondering if in your research, was there different setbacks on the digital display signs, right? So if you have an institution one, is it possible that the institution is a larger setback from the roadway, which could then warrant a larger size digital display sign or digital message board sign, whereas a business located, a closer proximity to the roadway that's trying to have a digital display sign, we might say, like, here's one where I could put it politely, will barter on the idea of, okay, size would be a function of a digital display sign, right? If it's a large sign that's flashing and flickering, okay, I can follow the safety hazard there. So if we're saying maybe have a bit of a different setback, or setbacks would then equal a different size of a digital display sign, kind of the way we've talked with billboards, right?
Right. I don't have that recorded. It may have been there. There was a lot of content to digest, so I didn't copy that down.
It gets blurry looking at 7 or 8 different signs.
Yeah, but I did notice, not this one, but there were others where it was prorated. So like, say the size of a sign was prorated to the frontage of your building, something like that. I can't think of a specific proration to setback, and no, there might have been for like development signs too. There could have been this, and not every municipality, the bigger municipalities had the size of the sign was prorated to maybe the size of the property and the setback from the road. So it's, your idea is, I've seen it used in other applications, just can't, and it may be in this one too, I just don't remember seeing it. Is that one we could maybe delve into a little bit? Because, you think about the school and the sign on the front of the school, and it's set back. It's a large building, it's set back from the road. And then you've got the library sign too, is larger, but it's also set back from the road. So there may be some way of having a little bit of discretion around that. I think I don't want to spend too long in this particular item, but it may be something we can come back to and see if we can get some examples perhaps of how we might make this a bit more nuanced.
I would almost not, obviously not right now, but in terms of when we're completed with this process, I'm assuming that Director Benner and his team are going to have to kind of go through all our notes to compile kind of that last motion of the committee of the whole to make everything coincide and read logically. So this might be something where the three of us agree that the size and scope can be warranted to the setback and the distance from the roadway. And that's something we can give direction to, and then Director Benner can kind of come back with a best practice model of that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Councillor Nielsen. Councillor Allen, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was just going to say about any sign, if you go to a sign company, and one of the questions they'll ask is how far away is the sign going to be from the traffic, and then they will figure out what size the sign should be and what size the font should be. So obviously if we put a restriction on the size of a digital sign, but then also put a setback that isn't realistic. So there's no use people having them. So we need to make sure that those two work together. So that was my only comment.
No, it's good, reasonable points. And I like Councillor Nielsen's suggestion that, we can identify where there can be some discretion, I guess. And that maybe staff can tidy those areas up. All right, so looking at setbacks and as a proportion of the size of the sign, size of sign and setback. Length of image, we're okay with 60 seconds between change of image. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah. Again, it depends on speed of traffic. It doesn't matter, if you're going 90 kilometers an hour past a sign, doesn't matter whether it's 60 seconds or 20 seconds, you're not going to have, time to read it anyways. So yeah. And we need to tie all those things together, speed limits and length of time. And
yeah,
I'm just, I'm looking at in there, we've got 300 meters measured on any side of the road from which the sign may be viewed. That 300 meters, that's a long way.
Yeah.
I don't think any of the digital signs that are in Grey Highlands would come close to being that setback. So, is 300 meters realistic? I'm not sure that it is.
Yeah. To be honest, I hadn't really considered that one. It seems excessive.
It's a third of a kilometer.
Yeah.
Almost.
Especially when they're in, downtown area, employment area. That seems like you can see it more in the recreational area, perhaps, but maybe not even there. Shall we just strike that?
I think we better.
I'm for that. I remember that discussion during the committee of the whole.
Okay, so we'll take that out. All right, can we move on then to, and the definition. I found some examples of definitions that are a lot less complicated. And I don't know if having such a fulsome definition it seems more informative than it is about, covering liability or anything like that. I can circulate some other examples of what other municipalities use if you would like me to.
If that's not too much for you, Chair Little, then that would be a benefit.
I don't know that I can do it while I'm chairing, but unless we take a recess or something, but I will send it out, prior to our next meeting.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Directional sign. Yeah, this is where I had exception neighborhood highlighted that we had. I don't remember what our direction was. We made some change on May the 10th. Anyway, you see, it's in all areas, and I think we included neighborhood. I'm not sure. And then the size of the sign, how many signs, and then the part about the logo. Any comments there?
Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Nielsen, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Little. So directional signs seem to be more about within the lot, not necessarily wayfinding signage, right? So we're not talking about signs that are somewhere far away, trying to give directions to that operation. They're trying to more be parking signs, exit signs, entrance signs, directions as to where, if you go to the back of a lumber mill, for instance, there might be a sign saying lumber 2x4 is this way or something. To that end, I think the maximum of 2 signs permitted per lot doesn't really seem to make sense, because you're going to have probably 2 signs that would say entrance to the entrance sign. You're going to have 2 signs that say exit. You're going to have signs that direct to those locations. So the 2 per lot doesn't seem to make sense to me. Also, a lot of the signage when it comes to directional signage would be interior to the lot and not necessarily for exterior visibility. So again, you know, if we're saying distraction, if we're saying these are the reasons why we'd have the limitations, most of these signs are not going to be visible to people who are not on the property, and not visible until you actually enter the property.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, signs that are interior to the property are, I think, are exempt, or, you know, don't require a permit. So maybe that could be clearer. It may be signs that are visible from the street that have to be more restrictive, but.
Then a question too for, because you do have the change there being the neighborhood change. For Director Benner, auxiliary uses to your home occupation, right? They would be allowed to have a directional sign because they might want to have a specific spot to go parking on that property that would be in a neighborhood function, where you'd want to make sure you're guiding them towards a couple of parking spots you might have around the back of the building. Would that make sense in terms of why we would say yes to the neighborhood exemption?
To very little to come. So yeah, that makes sense. I think we need to recognize that there is a difference between directional sign that's like on the exterior or something, or right at the front of your property. Once you get internal to your property, Councilor Nielsen is correct. The interior signs don't require permits, but you still want to. I could see even on a home occupation, you might have something at the end of your driveway saying, you know, such and such business parking with an arrow pointing that way. So we'll still be part of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Director Benner. Councilor Nielsen, maybe it's 2 per lot, not including interior signs.
That would be better.
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm doing mental math. I'm trying to think. So if we're having your lot, you have an entrance sign, you're going to have an exit sign. You may have parking directions here. You may have a sign for. I'm only doing the mental math because I'm making sure in my head that we're not going to be restrictive on this one. A sign above the door saying your entrance to the business wouldn't equate as a directional sign. That would equate as a different type of sign, right? So that's the hard part, because then I'm trying to think, okay, we're saying 2 directional signs might make sense because some of the other signs might fall into other categories that they would still have on the property. Yeah, I don't know. I think. I'm kind of looking at the 2 saying, why do we need it? Are we concerned that there's going to be like 4 entrance signs? I don't know. A lot of the other signage you can think of around the building are going to be falling under different categories. Under this section where it says directional signs has a maximum of 2 per lot. Would it get confusing to people? Would it matter if there was 3 directional signs because the lot's bigger? I think you have a food land might have multiple entrance signs, right? There's a couple of different entrances to the food land that say entrance and exit. Plus you have parking signs. There's a handicap parking sign count as a directional sign. There's a no parking sign count because you're saying this section is no parking over here. That's the part where I'm trying to balance it. I don't see the reason to have a limit.
Well, when I did my
I agree.
Okay, thank you. Sorry if I missed you with your hand up. Sign specific. It was common to have 2. There was a lot of consistency actually within the directional signs. I guess my comment might be that there's always going to be a lot of exceptions to the rules, and we can't address every situation. It's impossible. I think what we can do is use common sense and use, especially something that like this, where we're saying it doesn't require a permit. The only time someone would be in trouble, I guess, would be if it would be complaint based, right? If there's no permit, no one's going around looking to see if you're have more than 2 signs unless there's a complaint, in which case then there are some rules that have to be followed for disputes. Because if you have no rule there, like it's like 0 directional signs or 10 directional signs, whatever that number is, there's something there that's a rule, and you either are complying with it or not complying with it. And the only time it becomes an issue is for a sign not requiring a permit would be if there was a complaint. So it does seem kind of arbitrary, and whatever number we pick will not apply to all situations, but either we don't say or we put a number on it. So what's reasonable? Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's reasonable, but I'm thinking if somebody puts up 5 and then there is a complaint, then they either need to, so there's going to be staff time to deal with this. They either need to remove some, if we've set it at 2, or they would have to have a variance. And if that variance is looked at by the Committee of Adjustment, and it could be something else, there's going to be a cost to it, and a fairly substantial cost too, especially if it is Committee of Adjustment and there's 5 people, staff time and reports. It probably would be close to the cost of a minor variance to the zoning bylaw. So those are, I guess most of my comments so far have been the what ifs, but we do need to think about that. We don't want to make it so restrictive that it doesn't work for people, but we also don't want to just say, do whatever you want. So, and perhaps, again, it's based on the size of the property. A small lot, a small commercial lot in a village, you may only need 2, but a larger C4, you may need more signs. So perhaps it could work in zoning. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud, maybe a residential with a small home business can have the minimum of 2, but a property that's zoned commercial can have 6 or 8 or 10.
Councillor Allen, your example of the C4, I would think it's also the distinction between interior signs and directional signs. So most C4s, you would come off the municipal road or the county road into the C4 area, in which case, the signage in there would not apply, this part would not apply to that. So it's, I think it's mostly would be entrance and exit or deliveries here, or, handicap park. I don't even know if that fits into this either. It's, anyway. Perhaps relating it to the zoning use makes sense. On a residential lot, if it was a home occupation, you might have a sign saying deliveries or,
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of signage might be interior anyway, once you get them onto your property.
So
Well,
there's,
maybe that's, sorry, just a quick, maybe that's the way around it, is the initial directional signs enter here, and then as soon as you're in on the property, then you then have a post with, you know, deliveries this way, pickups here, and administration here. So
Right.
there's ways around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
so Chair, if I may,
Yeah,
just 2 points to this. One is, are we defining an interior sign, a sign that is only visible once you're on the property, right? So if you have a small residential spot, you can still potentially see some of the signage from the road depending upon sight lines and stuff. But my bigger one with directional signage is that really directional signage kind of enhances your safety features, right? Your safety function. If you're saying this is where your entrance is and we want you to go this direction, and then this side is the exit sign because we don't want traffic going on that side of my parking lot, or that the parking for cars is over here, or I have deliveries this way. Directional signage is kind of a safety signage. You're trying to give people directions on where to safely travel along your property. So if we try to say we're going to only allow two, I understand. I understand the want to have a maximum, but the only part I can see is for directional signage is where you get to a nuisance element, right? You're saying, okay, look, it's unattractive because you have 7 signs that I can see from the roadway saying, oh my gosh, I'm getting dizzy looking at this lot as I drive by because you got parking, entrance, exit this way, oh, over here is this way, and you know, and such. But ultimately, the directional signage is there as a safety element. So if we limit what people can put in there for directional signage, that to an unreasonable limit, you're probably not helping their safety functions. They're trying to safely move traffic around their property. You know,
Okay.
I'm looking at the examples in the draft bylaw, the images that were given, and some of those, I understand our interior signage, right? Because we're going to have this discussion whether it's an interior or exterior. But if you enter a large cemetery, there's directional signage pretty close to your entranceway that points you in different directions for the different lanes or elements. This is a benefit to everybody who's coming there, and it's a safety feature to have people not get driving all over the property in different directions that you might have one ways on your land that you're trying to control traffic. So I'm hesitant to be restrictive when it comes to directional signage.
so no limits, Councillor Nielsen?
I believe that if you put limits, you know, you would have to go a high enough limit that you can reasonably say that, okay, the safety element can get covered, but now you're just being, why are you peppering your land with a whole bunch of signs for no reason? It's kind of where you get lost at. I would say that 6 would be where I'm starting, because you're going to have entrance, exits, parking, directional. If you have one ways, I would kind of lean towards 6 as the earliest maximum I'd be interested in, to try to make sure that you're capturing everything that is possible. I mean, you could have 6 be the maximum, and then that is a pretty healthy max to where most of your safety directional signage should be able to get you onto this property, and then from the interior of it, you have your interior signage. But I think 2 is just too restrictive.
Okay. Councillor Allen?
I'm thinking about, again, the size of the property. Even a small commercial lot, 6 is quite excessive, but perhaps on a small lot, they wouldn't require 6, so they just wouldn't do that. We have to think about that too, that, you know, some common sense and cost of printing up signs if they don't need them. So I think, why don't we put down 6, and we can, you know, we'll get comments from staff, we'll get comments from the public, and that's going to be the true indicator as to whether we're right or close to being right.
Okay, I follow up, Councillor Nielsen.
I'm okay with that. The only other thing I was thinking in my head is that it does say that example is parking signs, and if you look at properties that are in Markdale, like you have the TD Bank, that you park there, they have TD Bank customer parking, 2 or 3 signs there that are visible from the road. Then you have Markdale Vets parking signs there too, and so if parking is one of them, we have a lot of situations where parking is shared in different lots. So I think 6. It's amazing how much you need a sign until you try to sit here and limit them, right?
Mhm.
The pharmacy in Markdale has 15-minute parking limit signs and a handicap parking sign. So if parking signs are part of your directional signage, then I think it makes sense to have that many. But I agree with Councillor Allen. We can say 6 and move forward, and if we are logically challenged on that, then I've said my piece.
Okay. I disagree, but so we don't have consensus there. So then there's the size of the signage too. I can just do comparison of looking at between 4 and 6 other bylaws. The area of the sign was ranged from 0.375 meters squared up to 1.5 meters squared. The height, so all in the range of, like 0.5 to 1.5 meters squared. Height was 1 meter to 2.5 meters. They had setbacks 3 meters from property lines or driveways. So those were some of we didn't have setbacks, but a lot of them had 3 meters from the property line or from driveways. So right now we have 1.5 meters squared, which is the largest of any that I looked at. And the only other stipulation we have is that the logo shouldn't take up more than 1/5 of the sign. So any comments there on the size of the sign and content of sign?
I would argue that 1.5 meters is plenty, if not more than necessary for directional signage.
Okay.
Ironically, I can agree that we're talking about a digital sign being 0.5 meters square maximum, and then you say, well, a directional sign can be 1.5 square meters, and like, wow, that must be an awful big directional sign to tell you where to go.
Yeah.
They're very politely telling you where to go. And I understand the logo concept too, because you're saying this is a directional sign. This is a safety sign, as I said, right? Your objective here is safety, not to promote that your business is the one being safe.
Okay. And what about setbacks? Not just too complicated, or what do you think?
So 3 meters is not much in terms of your distance. And I guess your objective there would be just to make sure you're not right on a road allowance or, on a sidewalk, or having space enough from a sidewalk so you're not going to impede anything there.
Actually, it was, well, no, there's some variation there. 1 meter from the road was the setback, and then 3 meters from your other property lines, like the rear
Okay.
and side lines. Yeah,
Okay.
that wasn't in our original one, so I just made note of it. So
if you're wanting to do setbacks, those setbacks don't seem to be large enough to be a frustration for any property owner. Like your entrance and exit, you're wanting to have pretty close to your property line, right? So you're 1 meter from the road makes sense, because that's where you're trying to show where you want people to come onto your land. And then a 3 meter setback from your property line for your interior ones, that doesn't feel restrictive and makes sense. You're not going to be bothering your neighbor by putting signage up close to the line.
Councillor Allen, any comments?
No, I'm good with those.
Okay. Okay, moving on then. Oops, oh shoot. Sorry. I just exited I meant to click on it and I exited it. Okay, so we're
Can I
on,
ask a quick question of Director Benner?
yeah,
Chair Little, sorry for possibly slowing us down. Director Benner, when it comes to the directional signs and my concept for 6, when people are building lots or have commercial properties and then commercial properties have parking associated with those, is there a way to have parking signage be part of their, I don't know, would it be like site plan or something like that? Like if you're having parking and having it signed, and then the parking signage can be facilitated through their zoning and their site plan agreement rather than through the sign. I don't know if I'm making things more complicated, but I'm trying to, the differentiation between Councillor Little and myself when it comes to the number of signs, and I'm trying to be respectful. I'm just seeing directional signs. If we're saying parking is one of them, my gosh, it's amazing how many parking signs you end up needing once you start going handicap parking spaces. You know, now there's signage for family parking, right? Pregnancy parking and stuff like this. We're trying to be.
Yeah, I would, if I through you, Chair Little, a lot of times when we get a commercial development coming on stream, it'll have to go through, for a new one anyways, has to go through a site plan agreement process. And through that site plan process, we review things like, you know, your parking areas and things like that. And oftentimes signage is part of that. Then once you're, I kind of know what you mean. Like when you think about the TD parking lot, there's a bunch of signs that say staff parking and then public parking, handicap parking, that sort of thing. I would actually consider those to be interior signs. I'm thinking a parking sign is, or a directional sign is a sign with an arrow saying parking is this way, or main entrance, loading, truck entrance, that kind of stuff. Those are what I would consider to be the directional signs. Once you're internal and you're doing, internal operations, internal movements, however, I think those, even in a parking lot, I would consider those to be internal signs as opposed to a directional sign. So really, having 6 directional signs is probably lots, but then once you're inside, once you're in the property boundaries, then you'd have a whole bunch more.
Thank you, Director Benner. So, I mean, to Chair Little, if that's, if we change the definition of directional signs to not include parking signs, then the 2 limit makes sense. Because that's where I kept getting hung up in my head, is trying to, for your safety features, you're having parking signs safely saying, here's where I want certain groups of people to park for very valid reasons. And if we're saying those were a part of the directional signs, if we change the directional signs to not include, the definition doesn't include parking signs, and that those are, I don't even know where they would put them in. I mean, parking signs just make sense. We shouldn't need a permit to put up a parking sign that says no parking or handicap parking or any kind of parking. You're just trying to help people understand where you want them to park. But if you take that out, then I would be fine with the maximum of 2. All that was done just to say, I can agree with you if we take parking signs out.
Oh, you'd say like 2 directional signs excluding parking related signs. Yeah. Councillor Allen.
Well, maybe I should just disagree, just to be, no, that makes sense. But a question I have is, when Director Benner was saying about the parking signs and you brought up TD parking lot, didn't it say that a interior sign cannot be visible from the road? That we have a lot of properties that aren't big enough to have a sign that aren't visible from the road. So we need to, again, we need to tweak that to make sure it doesn't restrict people from having a parking sign. So,
Perhaps just saying under the permitted without permits, parking signs are permitted, and then have a definition of parking sign can't exceed. I mean, we all know what a traditional parking sign is, less than half a square meter. It's probably like 0.3 square meters in size, and just have a blanket. Parking signs are allowed wherever necessary.
right. And again, if the property is big enough and they require more signs, then they probably can be placed where they're not visible from the road.
So we'll go with 2 and then make a separate category for parking signs that aren't regulated. Don't need a permit, correct?
Right.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment, a general comment. It's interesting, these smaller task forces or subcommittee where you can have this informal, back and forth a lot easier than a committee of the whole meeting where you have to, wait your turn after there could be 7 people. And now there's the negative side is that the other 4 may not agree with us when this goes back to them, but it is, I'm finding that part of it more enjoyable than, well, the marathon committee of the wholes for the sign bylaw before, or budget or anything like that. Maybe the 3 of us should do budget too. I don't know.
I decline. Okay, so we've got, we're going back to the original, sorry. Sorry, I just want to make sure. Not exceeding 1.5 square meters, maximum of 2 signs are permitted per lot, and a directional sign definition shall not include parking signs. Is that correct? Okay. Okay, fascist signs. And there's different stipulations for there's some that apply to all designations: downtown and commercial, employment area, neighborhood, rural and agricultural. Any thoughts on? I'm just looking at my fascist signs. I only had on there that they have the potential to cause harm because they're affixed to the building itself. And so if they fail, then they could injure someone, like if they're over a sidewalk area. Going by canopy and awning signs, where we talked about having a licensed installer, I think for a fascist sign, we would want a licensed installer as well. Should we go through the downtown area, commercial and business area? Oh, sorry, that was was that something we added? 1 per business frontage. Shouldn't stick out more than 30 centimeters from the face of the building. There's different criteria for it's a smaller sign if it's in a neighborhood. Larger setbacks in the rural and ag. Do we agree that fascist signs, somehow we have to ensure that they're installed by a licensed installer? Is that we're okay with, we can agree on that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. I should say that all the other bylaws I looked at said one per frontage. Whatever that frontage is. Does that make sense?
So, so this one here says one per business frontage. If you have like a strip mall situation, you would have 4 or 5 different businesses located in that strip mall, and the fascia sign is your main like business sign, right? Your main sign saying, example, you have Subway in a strip mall located beside a Pet Value located beside something else, and they're all in one building. So each one of them are going to have per business frontage. So my section of this. So rather than per building, you'd want the per business frontage. I think makes sense. The definitions we have in here.
One per business frontage, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Agree, Councillor Allen?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Is the next part I'm looking at, such sign shall be located so the center of the sign is located at the center of the business. Is that still in? I may not be looking at the same version as you have. I don't agree with that.
That was in the original. And so it's there.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. You might
Yeah.
want over the entrance. You could have a fairly large building, but only want it over the entrance or a window or something like that. So I don't think we should be putting a restriction on where it's located.
I'm okay with that.
I would agree with Councillor Allen there.
Okay, so remove the stipulation that it has to be centered. Just looking at what consider a safety element. So the sign, this is in the business area, shall not extend by more than 30 centimeters from the face of the building. Sorry. This was pretty consistent when I compared other bylaws. It was 30 centimeters, 60 centimeters, 50 centimeters. So it was kind of a range.
I'm okay with this.
Again,
It's just a design style. So if you have it 30 centimeters thick, you can still have plenty space to have the size of the sign you need to project your business.
Okay, Councillor Allen, 30 centimeters.
Yeah, that's a foot. You start getting out to 2 feet, like 60 centimeters, and you know, we've already said we want it installed by you know, licensed installers, but it's still that's a lot of weight hanging out 2 feet. So yeah.
Okay.
And I don't quite understand what the benefit to 2 feet, unless you're also using it as a veranda, like a porch, keep the rain off people standing at the door. So
Yeah.
no, I think the less deep is better.
The fascia sign and all the other signs where we think we need a licensed installer, like awning and canopy signs, they all bylaws seem to have a similar like 2.43, 2.5, 2.4 meter clearance, you know, between the bottom of the sign and the sidewalk. So I think leaving ours, does ours say that? Must say it somewhere else. I don't see clearance on there. Should we include that in the fascia sign just for consistency? As well as a general provision, or?
The must be installed by the licensed installer portion.
I'm sorry, say that again, Councillor Nielsen.
Sorry, you're saying, do we want to include the must be installed by a licensed installer portion?
No, the part about the clearance, it's absent in this, in our bylaw. It doesn't say specifically at fascia signs. Now, I may have made a mistake, but like the awning sign and the canopy signs, and I think there were some others that had like a 2.5 meter clearance between the bottom of that sign
Right.
and pedestrians are walking. Like, I don't see a problem with putting that in here.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. The only question there is, under the definition of the fascist sign, it might not necessarily be along the top portion, like it could be along the side of a building as well. Right? Because it's just saying that it's, well, it does say placed parallel to. Oh, parallel to. Yeah. I can't think of a fascia sign that would be located flat against the building, so maybe I'm wrong. But if you're the 1 foot out, I wouldn't be against putting it in there. Your provision of the 2.5 meters above the sidewalk,
Assuming it's hanging
above an entranceway, right?
where people are going to be walking. So, yeah, 2.5 meter clearance.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Okay. Councillor Allen, you're okay with that?
Yes, yeah.
The size of the fascia sign. The bylaws I looked at, this was one, Councillor Nielsen, that kind of related the area of the sign to the frontage. So, wow. One had 15% of the frontage could be a fascia sign. So the last one I looked at was Waterloo, had 1.5 square meters per meter of frontage. That's a pretty big sign. Maybe
So
not.
you,
We
yeah.
could go right across your whole building, right?
I think again, if we're looking at fascia signs being your main business indicator, right? Every business wants a sign that says, okay, I'm actually here. Here's my
Yeah.
main sign that says, this is what I'm doing here. You have, if we go, we have size of the signs written in here.
Mm-hmm.
If we try to limit it based upon the building frontage, you might have challenges in situations where you're, again, the strip mall concept, right? If you're saying you could have long, narrow buildings, look at the storefronts for Flusherton, right? Those buildings are narrow buildings but go deep. So if you say you're limited by the size of your frontage, you might be pretty restrictive on how, although per 1 meter of frontage, 1.5 square meters of sign is a fair, as you said, you're getting a pretty big allowance for a sign on that frontage space. I just think we have the limitations on the overall size, right? Maximum height of it is written in here of the signs. 7.5 square meters per sign, 4 meters per sign. So there are restricted in total size.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to have it restrictive also to the size of the building.
So just keep that as is.
I'm okay with it as is.
I find the employment area one very confusing. However, it's not very straightforward to me.
Just going to exceed it with. There's a bit of math in that explanation.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Like, I'm just thinking about from the public perspective. Like, it's not helpful. Can we keep the employment Like, what is an employment area? That's an area where there's businesses? How is an employment area different from a downtown commercial area?
Is an employment area like Chapman's, like industrial zones? I know Director Bennett said he just had to step away, so he might be
Yeah.
able to come back and answer that.
I
But I'm
think
pretty sure
Chapman-
your employment lands are, no, it's not Chapman's, isn't it?
Well, Chapman's, wouldn't that be space extensive, industrial, commercial, industrial?
Yeah, I think that's industrial.
Employment area,
But I was gonna say, because industrial isn't anywhere listed in our designations for these signs. Right? So that's why I'm thinking employment area is what's covering
I
that
think
section.
it's space extensive, commercial and industrial is a designation. I think we just redesignated part of Markdale. Oh, there's Director Benner. Okay, Director Benner, we have a question for you. You step away and you're needed.
Sorry about that.
Just wondering, we're looking at fascist signs and the stipulations for fascist signs in the employment area is very complicated, unlike other regulations that are much easier to understand. And we're all wondering why, first of all, what distinguishes an employment area and why would it be different? Could we not apply what we are using for downtown and commercial business area?
I'm just reading the employment thing. I think the only real difference, I think we could do that. It looks like now I'm changing about the size of the signs and stuff, but the idea that it's uses, is lit differently in terms of backlighting and internal lighting. We could just roll them all together.
Okay,
That might be easier. Like just have downtown area, commercial business areas, and employment areas all as one.
right. Commercial business area is not really one of our designations, is it? Like, I think that was something we added at committee of the whole.
Yeah, we did to recognize our other settlement areas that don't have a downtown designation.
Oh, I see. Okay, right. So some of those smaller settlement areas, are they just, what are they designated as? Just a settlement area?
Yeah, just as
Oh.
settlement area. Like Maxwell, for instance, is actually a tertiary settlement area.
Right.
So it really doesn't have a designation other than that.
So maybe we could just, wonder if we could put that in our definitions that for, like Markdale's employment areas,
Mhm.
does Flesherton have an employment area?
Yes.
Okay, so for all the other settlements, maybe we could either call it the downtown boundaries or the downtown, or it's the commercial business area of the, I don't know, it's we can't exclude them.
No, definitely not. So we could, yes, in a definition, say a commercial business area includes businesses that are located in secondary and tertiary settlement areas, something like that.
It'll almost be less verbiage to the list of towns.
Right, yeah, just say it's included in.
Maxwell, Feversham, Binghamton, and so on, right? Then it'd be,
Exactly, yeah. Or outside of.
Okay, we can add that to definitions.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Director Benner.
You're welcome.
Then we got fascist signs are allowed in neighborhood designations, and there's one per lot. Smaller sign, smaller depth. You can read it there. I think 3 meters from a property line makes sense.
What's setback on a residential building? Councillor Allen?
Side setback is 3 meters, interior side setback. Front is 7.5 for residential.
So you're saying the sign, if your residential can only be, is that setback, and your sign's gonna be on that building, then it would make sense that the sign will be the 3 meter setback as well.
Yeah. It's obviously a smaller sign in the neighborhood, right? It's a smaller area and thinner.
Now, when you think about a lot of the homes in the villages, the 7.5 meters is not met in a lot of them. So then do we, if it's going on a building that's pre-existing but doesn't meet the setbacks, are we allowing that? So do we put a setback or attached to the legal non-conforming building, something along that line? Is it, we shouldn't be telling people they can't put a sign on their building because they don't meet setbacks when the whole building doesn't meet the setbacks.
Valid point, Councillor Allen.
That makes sense. Director Benner?
Thank you for recognizing me, Chair Little. Yeah, I was kind of wondering why we even had these setbacks, because a fascist sign is on a building, on an existing building. So I don't know why we would put these setbacks in the Pecuniary, to be honest.
That was
Okay.
my thought once Councillor Allen had mentioned the non-conforming buildings.
So don't have setbacks then?
Yeah, because they have to be put on a building that exists anyways.
Right. And if it's being, being installed correctly, then we shouldn't have to worry about public safety.
Mhm.
Okay, so no setbacks then for any of the fascist signs?
Mhm. Part of our general nature is that if the sign hangs over our municipal property, then we'll be requiring the insurance, right?
Yeah,
So if there are right on,
okay. Okay, so no setbacks. Okay. What about the other dimensions of we're on the neighborhood sign right now. 0.4 square meters, 15 centimeters thick. 1.5 meters above grade.
all those seem reasonable.
Does that a maximum height of 1.5 meters above finished grade? That's only 5 feet.
Yeah,
I believe when we talked about this one during the committee as a whole, the premise was that you in a neighborhood, you didn't want the sign being high up the building and then making it look like a commercial building in the middle of the neighborhood. So that the sign wouldn't actually be like on your roof or right above your doorway, be more kind of a smaller sign located beside it saying that this isn't your home occupation because it's a secondary or auxiliary use to the neighborhood, to your residential home, right?
right.
That was the recall because I brought that up during the committee of the whole, but that was the explanation that I got then.
Yeah,
if-
just like home occupation sign, wouldn't it be in a neighborhood?
Yeah, and if the bottom is 1.5 meters and the sign is, a meter high, that puts you to the roof line anyways, so that makes sense. Okay.
Okay, so neighborhood stays as is. And then we've got, sign shall state only the name of the occupant of the building, the address and profession. Does that need to be in there?
Probably.
I will not
Maybe-
argue third-party advertising in a neighborhood fascia sign, because that just doesn't make sense to have third-party advertising on a neighborhood fascia sign. So yes,
Name, address, business,
of the occupant of the building.
yeah. Okay, rural and agriculture. We took out the, well, we haven't discussed this one yet, but I think at one of our committee of the whole, I think we took out the size. But everything else was the same. Comments? One sign per business, one sign per lot.
Counselor Allen, I'll recognize you. Counselor Little is distracted. She's not distracted. She was taking notes.
So it's saying in rural and agricultural, a depth of 0.15 meters, which is 15 centimeters, which is less than we were saying is allowed in a, where did we allow 30? In the downtown, I believe.
During the committee of
Why?
the whole, Counselor Allen, that section was stricken out. You're reading
Okay,
off of the one
all right.
previous to committee of the whole. So
Yeah.
it was stricken out saying not exceeding 3 square meters, a depth of 0.15 meters and a maximum height of 3 meters above finished grade was stricken out because the explanation I brought is in rural and ag, you frequently see fascia signs of the family name on a barn, right? Saying that that's their farm, family farm. And so it can, you put it, as soon as you put it high up on a barn, it blows all of those out of the water. And it is a very common use in a agricultural setting.
Okay.
So, again, the setbacks from the property line would depend on the building itself, correct?
Yeah.
So there's nothing that really needs to be there except one per lot?
Yeah, I'm trying to think in rural and agriculture, the sign shall state only the name of the occupant of the property, the address and or profession of the occupant. So name of the occupant is like your business name, right? It wouldn't have to be your actual resident name. It's your business name. So that makes sense for your fascia signs.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
I do have one question for Director Benner. So we did hear that we changed the definition of billboard in the billboard bylaw to almost kind of takes the same definition of a fascia sign. So I'm wondering when it comes to this completed bylaw, because I think where we stood at billboard bylaws was that we were just going to take the billboard bylaw as written and put it in kind of into this bylaw. That definition is close to this fascia sign. So how do we facilitate that when the bylaw becomes the one unit, Director Benner?
Yeah, I think that when this all becomes one, so the billboard bylaw we have now gets absorbed into this, we may need to revisit the definition
definition.
just to make sure everything's flowing properly.
Okay.
properly, because it's, yeah, we don't want to end up even confusing people even more.
Thank you, Director Benner.
I guess I was confusing fascist sign and wall sign, and I was thinking that the billboard sign was referring to wall signs. But looking at the fascist signs here, I realized they could be wall signs the way they're described. In my mind, I was thinking of fascist signs as more like the business name that goes up, right across the front of your building. That's what I was imagining, but that's not what it says here. So,
And
thank
that's
you
the part, I agree
yeah.
with you, right? Your fashion
Yeah.
sign being a business name, but then the definition here is awful similar to what we changed the billboard one too. So
Yeah, good
it
point.
gets a little confusing that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. All right, so there's a couple things to clear up there, and we're on to ground sign. Again, it's different for different designations. Ground sign, a sign supported by one or more upright poles and braces or located on a structural base placed in or upon the ground. I think there's a limit to the size of the sign, depending on which designation it is in. And I think that's probably for safety reasons, since it's stuck in the ground and being supported there, that anything larger would maybe have the potential to cause harm if it's not installed correctly.
The
Let's go
size,
through.
I was gonna say the
Let's go
size here is pretty significant. So I think your there's no need to go bigger than this. And the ground sign, they're even saying the width, so you could have 3 meters in width is a pretty significant, display and
Mhm.
structurally sound that way, right?
Okay, yeah. All right, so 7.5 square meters. 2 faces combined. Should not exceed 3 meters in width. Should not exceed 3.5 meters high. Setbacks 3 meters to a property line. Ground sign can be erected between the main front wall of building that is less than 3 meters from a property line. Okay, so it's just providing for those businesses that are closer than 3 meters to the street. It looks like it's half the distance. It's half the distance. And bed and breakfast is a separate category. I'm wondering if bed and breakfast could be like, how we have real estate signs are exempt. Bed and breakfast sign could be something similar. Just, as long as it's this size, then, you don't need a permit. One per street frontage, not to exceed 1 square meter, 1.5 meters high. There were a couple of other ones like this that were sort of specific that I found. One applied to a conversation we had at our last meeting, Councillor Nielsen, about congratulatory signage on private residential properties. I'll share that with you later. But I thought it was kind of neat the way they had it, like, separated out and specifically applying to that situation, that it doesn't fall under all these restrictions. And I think this could be maybe another one, that a bed and breakfast, it just has a very specific dimensions to the size of the sign, which I think are quite similar to the NEC requirements as well. So I'm wondering if that could be like a separate type of sign. Anyway, don't mean to muddy the waters. What are your thoughts on ground signs in all designations? Councillor Allen.
So just above bed and breakfast operations, where you said about is no closer than 1/2 of the distance. So they're talking there, the scenario I mentioned, if the house is closer than 3 meters, this is saying you can be no closer than 1/2 of the distance of the building. So if the building is 3, you could be 1.5. Do we want to allow a sign closer to the lot line than a building? If the building doesn't meet setbacks, that's all ground signs. So So in a residential area with a 7.5 meter setback, if the house is at 4, that is saying you could be 2 meters.
No, it's saying 3 meters if that exists. But in cases where it doesn't exist, then there's an allowance that you can no closer than half the distance.
Right. So if a house is 4 meters from the lot line, then couldn't use, oh no, sorry, it's less than 3 meters. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
if it
still
was 4
allowing
meters.
sign closer. My example just wasn't. So if it's 2 meters, it's saying the ground sign can be 1 meter from the lot line.
Right.
Is that something we want?
So I'm not against this, the ground, because a ground sign is a very permanent, fixed structure, right? A ground sign isn't one that we have to worry about the wind blowing it away. You're talking about a pretty hefty built sound structure that is permanent to that space. If you look at the examples that are given in the pictures, and if you look at the way it's the size and scope of a ground sign. The only part that's hard is that if we say the ground sign could be 1 meter or 1.5 meters from the property line, and then you look at the ground sign can't be larger than 15 square meters in the area, that gets like almost a wall is your ground sign.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The only way to look at that is one, I don't see somebody building a wall out of a ground sign to kind of have something, but how would you then try to change in that situation? Like there's a specific situation being granted within this bylaw, but then do we want to change the size limits with that specific situation? A no bigger than 7.5 square meters per sign face is a pretty substantial size of a ground sign to have 1 meter from, like in between a building and your roadway, and then here's this giant ground sign.
If I may, you are allowed to put a fence right on the property line. So maybe what's the difference? We actually had one at last committee of adjustment where the fence was right there, and the house, I believe, actually infringed on the setbacks or into the setbacks. So there's lots of them out there.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. If you 6 foot high is a fence, right?
Yeah.
I think this is wrong. I could be mistaken, but I'm just quickly looking through the other designations, and it's saying that it can't be larger than this size. But then when you look at all the designations, it's very specific to what the size is, and they're all smaller than that size. So I'm not, and maybe you two can check that. All the other designations, there's nothing as big as 7.5 square meters or 15 square meters in total. I think that, I don't know why that's there.
Director Benner, could this be a layover from merging a few sign bylaws together when creating this draft?
Possibly. 7.5 square meters is really big. That's 80 square feet. That's like a sign 20 by 40. Seems huge.
Yeah.
Ground sign.
It's like the size of a ground, like I can't even picture that
Bigger
being
than
the
my
size of a
house.
ground sign at a university, right? Like your
Hmm.
university grounds or something might have a big dominant ground sign to University of Toronto, but I didn't even see that sign being that big.
Let's strike that.
Because it really doesn't make sense when your ground sign can only be 3 meters in width. You know,
Well, and as you say, Chair Little, each of the areas have a specific size, so
Right.
we don't need that one.
Right. So we'll strike that. And I think they all,
I think we could get rid of that whole thing, that whole A, B, C, and D. The following regulation shall apply to all ground signs.
yeah.
We've got setbacks, we've got sizes. Just if people can put a fence on the lot line, maybe we allow a sign to be on the lot line.
Okay, so you're saying strike that whole section except for the bed and breakfast part?
Yeah,
What you're saying is that the regulations that are actually in the draft bylaw be implemented rather than a generic regulations for all the ground signs. So that specific sections similar to the way the fascia signs is laid out here,
Yeah,
you have the ground signs that are the same way.
right. Okay, so eliminate all sections and pull out the bed and breakfast. So let's go down to rural and ag. We've got home-based business, home occupation, or home industry. 1 per lot, 1 square meter, 2 meters above grade, 3 meters from the property line, the usual, what information should be on the sign. One sign, 1 ground sign per entrance to a building. In rural and ag. 1 per frontage on a municipally maintained road.
So the only one, my issue in A under rural and ag is that the ground sign not exceeding 1 meter, 1 square meter. Is that too small for a rural designation? Because forgive me, I'm thinking in feet and I'm having a hard time. How big is 1 square meter? Is that
1 square yard.
1 square? That's great. I know that's a lot of gravel. I can get a yard of gravel. 1 square meter, Director Benner, how much is that? Is that 9 square foot?
yeah. Well,
1 meter by 1 meter.
Yeah. Okay, so that's not as small. That's the hard part. Because when you see it in the one, I'm like, man, that seems small. But then it's like, okay, you're getting so like
10.764 square feet.
right. So you're 3 feet by 3 feet is that's a big enough ground sign.
Okay.
The Under rural and agricultural, C, says a maximum of one sign per frontage is permitted on a municipally maintained road. I understand the intent of that comment, but it's sounding like it can be on the municipal road. A maximum of one sign per road frontage,
Yeah,
or a maximum of one sign per municipal road frontage is allowed. But the way it's worded, it sounds like you could actually put it on the municipal road,
right.
the municipal property. So maybe just a tweaking there.
Yeah. Road frontage. Good. It has 3 meters from the property line. Is that okay in rural and ag? This is a ground sign.
Probably more acceptable than in town.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, I think we've gone through that one then. Downtown area. 1 per business frontage, maximum area 2 square meters per side, not exceeding 4 in total. Width 1.5 meters, 30 centimeters thick, 2.5 meters tall, 3 meter setback.
So here's a question then, is the 2 square meters per side too big in a downtown area? Because you would think you'd have more space to display a ground sign in a rural setting than a downtown setting. And you're saying rural is 1 square meter, but downtown is 2 square meters.
Maximum. This downtown area encompasses a lot of different kinds of business properties, right? Like when you look at the examples that are given in the definitions, the pictures, and sort of imagine that some of those are, you know, on a larger property.
Chair Little?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. If it helps visualizing things, a 4x8 sheet of plywood is 3 square meters.
Oh,
That is a great visual tool. Thank you, Director Benner.
You're welcome.
that's great. Okay, so it's a maximum of 2 meters. You think that could just be discretionary then? If someone has a smaller property, maybe they don't want a large ground sign? Like if you make it too small, it might not suit a larger property.
Yeah, I like, looking at the examples, they're closer to that. You know, the veterinary one isn't necessarily as big as a sheet of plywood, but the first example given there, that kind of entranceway, ground sign would be that size of a sheet of plywood, and I can picture that scope, and it not looking too big if it's the entranceway to a a winery or a farm operation or a C4 location that is taking up acres of land, to say, okay, you can only have the 1 square meter in your rural setting, but then in the downtown, which I understand you're saying, like, it's downtown has a few different lot sizes you can have in your head. But yeah, it almost seems a little too restrictive in the rural setting still.
Mm-hmm.
Once I like the sheet of plywood visualization tactic. And we're
Well,
also saying maximums, not minimums, right? We're not saying you have to have it that big.
well, that's right. Yeah. It's a
So-
max. Yeah. Okay, so we're downtown. Counselor Allen, what are you thinking?
I'm not sure. But are we combining downtown and employment area? Can we combine it for the fascia?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because the employment doesn't really stipulate just how many you can have. Jeez. So it's
So
saying
you're talking the 2 square meters? Is that the question you're?
Yeah, 2 square meters. I think Councillor Nielsen was kind of looking like, so then why in the rural and ag did we put it at 1 square meter? What if we just made them both 2 square meters?
Yeah, that's fine.
That seems to make more sense to me.
Okay. So,
And our zoning bylaw, in the rural, that's the problem we've got actually right now. Rural and agricultural home-based businesses, it does restrict it to 1 square meter in our zoning bylaw. So, but if it's a C4 or something like that, then it's not restricted, I believe. So maybe that's why it's 1 square meter. It's conforming to the zoning bylaw.
okay, I didn't realize it was in there.
Yeah. I'm 99% sure it's 1 square meter for a home occupation.
So that would be the downtown, no, where would that be? That's the rural and ag, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
okay. That's why the difference.
Okay. So
But
we'll
then
leave
it probably in downtown area or a residential lot, if you have a home business, it's, I believe, the same 1 meter restriction. So we've got to watch that or deal with it when we do our zoning bylaw review.
Okay, so you're saying in a residential area, home-based business is still 1 square meter?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe staff,
Could we,
do you
yeah,
think we should make this conform to the existing zoning bylaw then?
think we have to until
Yeah.
the new one could be a year away.
Right, okay. Okay, so
Do
this
we-
section,
Sorry to keep interrupting. Do we put in at the beginning, I forget what we were calling them, but things, just clarifiers maybe, that, that all signage needs to adhere or meet zoning bylaw requirements?
yeah, I think there is something.
Yeah.
But-
If different than the actual this bylaw.
But we should have it comply, don't you think, rather than have 2 separate standards that are in conflict?
Oh, I agree 100%, but maybe
Yeah.
just something to say that if there's a discrepancy, the zoning bylaw wins.
Right. Okay,
Somebody could have a home business in any of the villages and have a 1 meter square sign, Or they could go through the zoning bylaw and rezone part of their property, and then the bylaw, the sign bylaw would kick in, not the zoning. So that's why I'm saying we need something explaining why there could be a difference.
Right.
Just
Sorry, would that be a staff, when staff consolidates, they would match the draft sign bylaw up with the zoning bylaw to eliminate as many contradictions as possible? Or
Yeah.
make the sign bylaw conform to the zoning bylaw?
Yeah, this is going to be captured in the minutes, and our director of planning is listening, so I'm sure it'll be on their radar.
I think that was part of the ending of the committee of the whole, right? Was that the bylaw itself had to conform to everything and had to be edited through.
Yeah.
Just a question, if I may, we're
Mhm.
looking at rural and agriculture. Is the definition of a home-based business in rural and ag the same as a neighborhood? So I'm just, because that's why, if you're saying it's a zoning that says home-based businesses have that sign size, because it does say home occupation or home industry. So is like a farm setting considered home industry, a farm operation?
No, I don't believe so.
So this specific section of the sign bylaws seems to be only at referencing the home-based businesses located in rural and agricultural zones. So a farm industry, or like, because to what Councilor Allen said, the C4 would then be having some of their property is zone commercial. However, a ground sign is going to go on your entranceway, and I believe it's not the entranceway that usually gets rezoned. It's just specifically where they're talking about the industry. So what are we actually regulating here? Are we regulating a home-based business located on a 1 acre rural lot? Or are we regulating the C4s and farm operations that might want to be putting ground signs in? Or, because yeah, your C4 is what I'm thinking of. Because if you have rural or agricultural businesses, your farm shop, farm tractor dealer, or Maxwell Stones, what is their property zone, probably commercial, but do you know what I mean? I don't understand what we're regulating. We're regulating a home-based business located in a rural spot versus your farm and C4s and stuff.
I think before the planner director comes on, I think zones allow for a home-based business. So I don't believe that it doesn't need a zoning amendment or anything. They can just do it, I believe. And then, it has to meet certain criteria, not more than 25% of the floor area of the dwelling. A legal sign no larger than 1 square meter. And that's saying no home occupation shall be permitted in any zone unless defined as a permitted use and conforms to the following provisions. So I think the 1 meter is, if it's a home occupation, it's 1 square meter, regardless of where it is. Anyways, I'll let the director speak.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Councilor Allen's is correct. Like, you can have a home occupation or home industry anywhere where it's listed in permitted uses. And the fact that if we put in a note saying that the zoning bylaw, the provisions in the actual zoning bylaw take precedence over this bylaw, which is pretty common for these kind of bylaws to say that, then we don't need to worry about, geez, is that too big for a home occupation? Because the zoning bylaw provisions will ratchet that down. So think about Nielsen Farms. How big do you want your sign to look like in front of your farming operations, as opposed to your home occupation or home industry?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying, because to me, what we've written in here is regulations specifically around home-based businesses and rural agriculture, not your larger scale operations that could exist in those areas. And I'm just wondering if under your neighborhood definition that says home-based businesses, would that capture home-based businesses located in other zonings? Or would that specifically just capture home-based businesses located in neighborhoods? Thoughts?
Sorry.
Uh,
I don't know.
So the way they've got it, rural and agricultural, they're saying only the home-based business and like home occupation and home industry. They're not talking about anything else in the rural or agricultural. So that's why they're saying 1 meter there. But maybe we have a home occupation and home industry heading and say what size the sign can be there, as opposed to just having it in the rural and ag, because you can have it in on a residential lot in one of the villages.
Right. Because the only reason I'm bringing this up is because other sections of this bylaw that say rural and ag don't follow it up by saying the home-based businesses. They're just saying rural and ag. So then I'm just confused as to why that extra delineation here, specifically around the ground signs. Now, we can argue that it makes sense in home-based because our zoning is saying this is the size, this is the scope of a ground sign in any home-based business. But rural and ag encompasses more. So what I'm trying to say is that if it's a farm operation and they build a gigantic sign that suddenly somebody has an issue with, well, the sign bylaw is saying, well, it's not a home-based business, it was an agricultural business that I wanted to put up a gigantic sign, and the bylaw didn't account for that. It's just confusing.
Councillor Allen.
I'm going to start raising my hand again so I don't get too used to just talking. Yeah, I think we should pull out under rural and agricultural, pull out home-based business, and then say whatever size we want, and then have a separate heading or something that at the beginning of this section, home occupation and home industry, and then it's 1 square meter, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good suggestion. Yeah, there's a little bit of inconsistency that's challenging.
That's the fine tuning we get to do.
Well, actually, that is being consistent with the zoning bylaws. So it's actually accurate, but confusing for people.
Yeah.
Understand why it's smaller in the rural or ag.
Yep. All right. Anything more to say with rural and agriculture? Given the time, I'm hoping that we can finish up fascist signs and perhaps call it a day. I think we were just getting into downtown. We were going to combine downtown area and employment area. Downtown area has 2 square meters, maximum width 1.5 meters, thickness 30 centimeters, height 2.5 meters, setbacks. Employment, you can have a ground sign on each. If you're on a corner, you can have one on each street frontage. Any comments? Anything you want to change there?
Everything there works, including the statement that says where there's a fascia sign and projection sign, you don't get a ground sign too. Makes sense to me.
All right. I'm okay with what's there. Anything, Councillor Allen, that you?
No, we're eliminating that one whole section, A to D.
At the beginning?
Well, mine's at the end. It's between number 4 and 5.
In the draft bylaw, it's after the employment area, but before bed and breakfast signs.
Yeah.
Oh. What page
We're
is that?
eliminating that, right?
Page
Okay.
32 of 45.
35. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I just want to read it.
It's the one about setbacks and things like that.
What section is that?
5.12.
Got it. So after employment area, the following regulation shall apply to all ground signs, right? Oh, that's
Yeah.
the part that I had at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that whole thing's coming out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Are you agreeable to wrapping things up, or do you want to keep going?
So we got 9 minutes. Let's get rid of inflatable signs.
Well, we're already lumping that under animated signs, so
Fair.
can we still push to defer that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We can
manual-
stop here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think I'm about done.
I can respect that, Counselor Chair Little. It does get stir crazy, right? We're staring at everything and trying to keep it
Yeah.
straight.
Kind of go in circles. All right. I guess we're recessing again. Can I have a motion to recess, please?
Motion to recess.
Moved by Counselor Nielsen, seconded by Counselor Allen, all in favor. So we are now recessing. It's 3:52 PM. Reconvening on July the 5th, I believe it is. Yes, if you, I have it noted that I'm going to send out a few things. I don't know how we can come better prepared, but if you have, if you have specific, even if we can identify some of these problem areas that we get into, when we sit down here together, that would be helpful. Kind of a heads up. Any other comments from members of?
Just we're nearing the end of the Schedule B, so we are making progress. I'm an optimistic guy. We're making progress.
Yes, thank you. All right, have a good evening.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah, see you later. Bye.